For generations, we have been told that the secret to a long, healthy life, especially as we enter our golden years, is simple: just keep walking. Walk every day, take more steps, keep your legs moving. It's advice that's easy to give and easy to accept. Walking feels natural, unthreatening, and within everyone's reach. For many seniors, it's the go-to exercise, the gentle rhythm that promises to keep joints limber and hearts beating strong. But life rarely offers simple truths without nuance. And as we begin to peel back the layers of what it truly means to live well into our 90s and beyond, we find that the old mantra of "just walk more" isn't quite the full picture. Walking is good, no doubt. It's a foundation. But the reality is, walking, especially when done excessively or without mindful technique, can bring its own challenges. For many seniors, long walks can lead to joint pain, muscle fatigue, and sometimes even falls that change everything. The very movement meant to sustain life can sometimes become a source of wear and tear. If you imagine longevity as a journey, walking is only one path among many. And sometimes, taking a different route, one that asks less from tired joints and more from mindful, balanced movement, can be the key to not just adding years to life, but life to years. What if the secret to living into your late 90s isn't about how many steps you clock in, but how you treat your body's unique needs? What if there were alternatives that not only preserved your strength, but cultivated a deeper sense of balance, vitality, and even peace of mind? This isn't just about physical exercise. It's about embracing a way of living that respects the wisdom of the body and the spirit, the delicate dance between effort and rest, strength and flexibility, movement and stillness. In the pages ahead, we will explore 5 powerful alternatives to walking, movements and practices carefully chosen for their ability to nurture every facet of your well-being. These alternatives draw from ancient traditions, modern science, and the lived experience of countless seniors who have found freedom beyond the treadmill of endless steps. From the graceful flow of Tai Chi to the healing embrace of water. From the quiet strength of resistance training to the breath-centered calm of yoga. And finally, the often overlooked power of mindful rest and recovery. Each offers a pathway to longevity that goes far beyond mere motion. Because at the heart of living well after 60 lies a profound truth. Longevity is less about pushing harder and more about moving wiser. It's a journey that invites you to listen closely to your body, to honor its limits, and to celebrate its capabilities. It asks you to cultivate patience, curiosity, and above all, kindness toward yourself. And so, as we step into this exploration together, remember this. Sometimes, walking less isn't a sign of giving up. It's a sign of stepping into a richer, Imagine a dance so gentle, so flowing, that every movement feels like a whisper between your body and the world around you. A dance that doesn't demand speed or strength, but invites patience, presence, and harmony. This is Tai Chi, an ancient art born from centuries of wisdom, now embraced by millions seeking balance in both body and mind. Tai Chi is not just exercise. It is a moving meditation. With every deliberate step, every slow, controlled motion, it teaches us to find steadiness where there was once uncertainty. For seniors, whose bodies may no longer respond with the agility of youth, Tai Chi offers something rare and precious. A way to reconnect, to rebuild, to restore. Balance is at the heart of this practice. Falls are one of the greatest threats to independence as we age, yet Tai Chi has been shown time and again to reduce these risks. How? By training the nervous system and muscles to work in harmony, improving proprioception, the body's sense of where it is in space, and gently strengthening the muscles that support our frame. But Tai Chi's gifts go deeper than physical stability. It calms the restless mind. It encourages us to breathe deeply, to slow down, to become fully present. And in this stillness within movement, something remarkable happens. Stress melts away, tension loosens, and a sense of peace takes root. Practicing Tai Chi is like planting a seed of vitality that grows over time. It reminds us that movement isn't about how fast we can go, but how fully we can inhabit each moment, how gracefully we can adapt to change. For those walking less, Tai Chi offers a beautiful alternative, one that nurtures strength without strain, mindfulness without pressure, and a profound connection between body and soul. It is the art of balance, not just in posture but in life. So as you breathe in and gently move through each posture, know that you are not only building physical resilience, you are cultivating a deeper wisdom. The wisdom that longevity is a dance between effort and ease, motion and stillness, strength and surrender. And with each practice step, you're learning the language of your body anew, a language of care, respect, and enduring grace. There's something almost magical about water. It cradles us, buoying our bodies as if the weight of the world simply melts away. For many seniors, water becomes not just a place to exercise, but a sanctuary, a gentle, forgiving environment where strength can be rebuilt and joints can heal. Swimming and aquatic therapy offer a unique blend of resistance and support, unlike anything on dry land. The water's natural buoyancy takes pressure off aching hips, knees, and ankles, making movement easier and less painful. This means that even those with arthritis, joint replacements, or chronic pain can engage in meaningful exercise without fear. But swimming is much more than a low-impact workout. It's a full-body symphony that combines cardiovascular endurance, muscular strength, and flexibility in one flowing motion. Each stroke activates muscles from head to toe, strengthening not only the body but also the heart and lungs. In the quiet rhythm of the water, breathing becomes a conscious, soothing act, one that calms the nervous system and replenishes energy. Aquatic therapy takes this a step further, tailoring exercises to individual needs. Therapists guide gentle movements that restore balance, improve coordination, and rebuild confidence. The water provides resistance that challenges muscles, yet cushions the body, creating a perfect balance between effort and ease. For seniors who find traditional walking or gym exercises too harsh or intimidating, the pool offers a fresh perspective, a place where limitations soften and potential expands. But beyond the physical benefits, swimming teaches us a valuable lesson about adaptation. Just as water flows around obstacles, we learn to move with life's challenges, adjusting our pace, our form, and our mindset. It reminds us that strength isn't about rigid toughness. It's about flexibility, resilience, and grace. So, whether you glide through the water with practiced strokes or simply float and gently move, know that each movement is a step toward greater health. It's a dance with an ancient element that supports, heals, and revitalizes. In this liquid embrace, as we age, one of the quietest yet most profound threats to our independence is muscle loss. It sneaks in slowly, often unnoticed, weakening our strength, balance, and ability to perform everyday tasks. This process, known as sarcopenia, can make the difference between walking confidently or relying on support, between living independently or facing the challenges of frailty. But here lies a powerful truth. Muscle can be rebuilt. Strength can be regained, even in the later decades of life. Resistance training, lifting weights, using resistance bands or bodyweight exercises, is the secret weapon in this battle against frailty. It is a deliberate, focused effort that challenges muscles to grow stronger and more resilient. Far from being a young person's activity, resistance training is one of the most effective ways seniors can maintain vitality and autonomy. The beauty of resistance work is that it can be adapted to every ability level. You don't need a gym full of machines or heavy barbells. Even simple, guided movements done at home can awaken dormant muscles, increase bone density, and boost metabolism. This not only improves physical function, but also reduces the risk of falls and fractures, the hidden dangers that can change the course of an elder's life. But strength training offers more than just physical gains. It cultivates confidence, a renewed sense of agency. When you lift, pull, or press against resistance, you are telling your body that it matters, that it is worth caring for. And this mental shift, this reclaiming of power, ripples into every aspect of life. Resistance training reminds us that aging doesn't have to mean decline. It can mean growth, adaptation, becoming stronger than we ever imagined. By embracing this practice, we rewrite the narrative of what it means to grow older. We step into a reality where the body is a vessel of enduring capability, where every effort strengthens the bridge between today and tomorrow. So whether you pick up a light weight or simply use your own body as resistance, remember, every repetition is a building block. Every set a step toward a future where frailty is not the story, but the challenge overcome. Strength is waiting. In the quest for longevity, strength and balance are vital, but so too is the cultivation of inner calm. As our bodies age, the mind often becomes a restless companion, tangled in worries about health, loss, and the future. This is where yoga and breathwork step in, offering a sanctuary not just for the body, but for the soul. Yoga is more than a series of postures. It is a holistic practice that weaves together movement, breath, and mindfulness. For seniors, yoga presents a gentle yet powerful way to stretch tight muscles, improve flexibility, and build strength, all while cultivating a deep awareness of the present moment. Unlike the hurried pace of daily life, yoga asks us to slow down, to listen to the whispers of the body, and to honor its limits without judgment. Each pose becomes a conversation between effort and ease, challenge and acceptance. Through this dialogue, tension dissolves, energy flows more freely, and vitality begins to stir. Breathwork, the conscious control of breathing, amplifies this effect. Our breath is the bridge between the body and mind, a tool that can calm anxiety, reduce stress, and sharpen focus. Simple breathing techniques can lower blood pressure, improve oxygen delivery, and awaken the body's natural healing capacities. Together, yoga and breathwork create a potent combination for enhancing not only physical health but emotional resilience. They help cultivate a deep well of inner peace, a refuge from the inevitable storms of aging. The beauty of these practices lies in their adaptability. Whether you are gently stretching on a mat, seated in a chair, or even lying down, there is a way to engage your body and breath that honors where you are today and invites growth tomorrow. In embracing yoga and breathwork, you are learning an ancient language of self-care, one that reminds you that true vitality comes from harmony within. It teaches us that longevity isn't just measured in years, but in the quality of each breath, each movement, each moment lived fully and with grace. So as you inhale deeply and move with intention, feel the energy rising. In a world that celebrates constant motion, relentless productivity, and ceaseless activity, the idea of slowing down can feel counterintuitive, even uncomfortable. Yet for those seeking true longevity and health after 60, rest and recovery are not luxuries but essential foundations. The body is a remarkable machine, but like any machine, it needs time to repair, rebuild, and recharge. Without proper rest, the wear and tear of life accumulates silently, eroding strength, impairing immunity, and clouding the mind. Mindful rest means more than simply sleeping or sitting still. It is an intentional act of tuning inward, listening deeply to the subtle signals of fatigue, tension, and stress that often go unnoticed until they become overwhelming. This kind of rest invites a shift in perspective, a recognition that our worth is not measured by how much we do, but by how well we care for ourselves. Sleep, of course, is the cornerstone of recovery. But beyond sleep, mindful practices such as meditation, gentle stretching, and quiet moments of reflection nourish the nervous system and soothe the heart. Science tells us that quality rest supports memory, emotional regulation, and hormonal balance, all critical components of aging gracefully. It's during these quiet periods that the body clears toxins, mends tissues, and replenishes vital energy reserves. Yet rest is also a profound teacher. It shows us the value of patience, the power of presence, and the art of surrender. In a culture driven by speed, embracing rest is a radical act of self-love, a declaration that our longevity depends not only on movement but on stillness. So, as you close your eyes, breathe deeply, or simply pause, know that you are investing in your future. You are honoring the wisdom that life unfolds in cycles of activity and repose. Mindful rest is not weakness, it is strength reborn. It is the hidden pillar that supports every step, every breath, and every heartbeat on the journey to 95 and beyond. Longevity is not simply the measure of years we accumulate. It is a journey, an art of conscious living that invites us to be fully present in every moment, to nurture both body and spirit with intention and care. After 60, life reveals its true depth. The choices we make each day, how we move, breathe, rest, and connect, shape the quality of our years ahead. Walking less doesn't mean giving up. It means embracing smarter, kinder ways to preserve our vitality and joy. From the flowing movements of Tai Chi to the healing embrace of water, from the empowering strength of resistance training to the calm wisdom found in yoga and breathwork, every practice teaches us a timeless lesson. True longevity blooms when body, mind, and heart unite in harmony. And let us never forget the quiet power of mindful rest, the hidden pillar that renews and sustains us. It is in this balance, between effort and ease, action and stillness, that we find the secret to living not just longer but fuller. Your journey toward 95 and beyond is uniquely yours, but you are not alone. Together we explore, learn, and grow. If this message resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe. Join this community of mindful